Hello and welcome to another episode of tSQLt Live DevOps Edition. If you're looking to learn more about DevOps, Data Platform DevOps, or DevSecOps, you have come to the right place. In this video series, I'm talking about what DevOps is, how to get started, why it is important, and also some more advanced topics. So no matter where you're at in your DevOps journey, there's something for you in here. With that, let's get started. Today's topic is DevOps parts, number 3. If you remember the definition from Donovan Brown of what DevOps is it is a union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And we talked about in the last 2 episodes about people and process. Today, I would like to take a look at products. What are the products we need to have to make DevOps work, to make a DevOps implementation successful? And I'm not going to recommend specific products, but I'm going to talk about the product groups that you need to make it work. There is at first the IDE. Everybody needs an IDE to work in. There are a few requirements for an IDE to make DevOps work, because you want everybody to work in the same or at least a similar environment. So good IDEs are, for example, Visual Studio Code, because it can just pick up the code in any directory. There are many IDEs out there like that. But there are also IDEs out there that are a little more, let's call it unflexible. For example, SQL Server Management Studio. SQL Server Management Studio has projects, but there is nothing automatic about them. So if you work with an IDE where the projects are difficult to manage, then you probably want to check in the project instead of just working in directories, which becomes a little more complicated and also forces everybody to use the same IDE. So when you pick an IDE, take one that is flexible, that can work with directories instead of projects, that can execute your code so that you don't have to switch back and forth, that can execute your test cases, even more important. You don't want to have to switch IDEs or programs really to write code, to write tests, to execute tests. That should all be integrated. That's the IDE. The next one is a source control repository. There is no question about that. You need a place to store your source code. And if you're a database developer, that place is not the database. In one of the later videos, I will talk more about why you don't want to use the database to store your code history. But for now, just suffice that you need some form of version control system. Most people today use Git, and I think that's a really good choice. Then you need a unit testing framework. Unit testing frameworks, there are several versions out there. If you're working in Java, you're using JUnit. If you're working in C#, you're using NUnit or one of the other ones that are similar to NUnit. If you're working with Python, you might use the PyTest framework or just a framework that's called unit test. If you're working with SQL Server, you can use tSQLt. There are a few things that you need to pay attention to when selecting a unit testing framework, but that is also the topic of another video. It's too much in there to cover that right now. Most important is that you have a unit testing framework. Do unit testing. Then you need some form of automation server. A CI server, a CD server, a continuous integration, a continuous deployment server. You can use one in the cloud like Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. You can use a self-hosted one like TeamCity. There are many, many versions out there. When it comes to selecting one, they are all very similar in functionality, so it almost makes sense to pick a server that most people are familiar with instead of going after the features. However, there are feature differences, so if you need a specific feature, pay attention to if the server you're looking at, the automation server, has that. The next one is an environment factory that plays along with the IDE. You want to be able to execute your tests easily. And it would be nice if you could achieve that just by checking out the code from source control. So if there is something stored within source control that allows you, without much setting up, to maybe execute a script and then have an environment where you can do all the coding and testing. Visual Studio Code dev containers comes pretty close to that ideal. Other people I've seen use cloud-hosted development environments where there's a script in source control and version control that if you execute that, it spins up a new development environment in the cloud that you can use to do all your coding, and everything that you need is already pre-installed. All the libraries, all the programs, IDEs that you might need. And you don't need to worry about having all that installed on your own machine. And if you're running it in the cloud, you don't even have to worry about your own machine being powerful enough to execute all that. That is particularly important if you are looking at including a database or if you're writing database code, because now you need a local database instance. And well, one way is to install something like SQL Server on your laptop. The other option is to use an environment factory that spins up a virtual machine that has SQL Server pre-installed. So having an environment factory is not a necessity. It makes working a lot easier. Then you do need an artifact repository. If your CI pipeline has spit out a version of your code that is certified, that has passed all the tests, that version of the code, that compiled version of the code should be stored somewhere. And you call that an artifact, and an artifact repository is a good place to store that. You can create your own artifact repository using a repository in your source control system, in your version control system, but artifact repositories are specialized and handle that type of use case a lot better. And finally, you need some form of monitoring and alerting, particularly if you're using continuous deployment, to make sure that all environments are up and running, that you get notified if there is an issue with production. And again, there are many tools out there that you can pick from. One of the most commonly used ones nowadays is probably Datadog, but depending on what you are writing, what your hardware or virtual hardware looks like, there might be other ones that are better suited. Anyway, that is all I have for you today. I hope you found that information to be valuable. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you would like to see more content like this, please subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a fabulous day.